Hi and namaste. My name is Henry Jolicoeur, and this is part 11 in my series of videos on the lies and deceits of Tulsi Gabbard. If you would like to know who I am and why I am doing this series of video, please look at part 1 in this series and you will know exactly who I am and why I am doing this expose. Today I would like to focus on two things. First of all, I was very surprised that Tulsi Gabbard had the guts to sue Google for $50 million for a small mistake. And as you know, Google is the owner of YouTube. And even as they are facing a legal challenge of $50 million, they still give facilities to Tulsi Gabbard to have thousands of videos on YouTube. They're very kind, really. This is like if you would sue your neighbor for a large amount of money, but you would still go there and borrow their car, and go in their kitchen, go in the refrigerator, make yourself a sandwich, and we'll see you in court. It's really ridiculous. The second thing I want to talk about is some more testimonial of Rama Ranson that I will put in this video. For me, one of the most shameful things in the Chris Butler cult is this brainwashing of his followers against homosexuality. Not only was he brainwashing his adult followers that homosexuality is a great sin, a despicable act, but they would brainwash little children as young as 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old, making them watch videos of Chris Butler preaching his homophobic views. And as you will hear from Rama Ranson, it did not stop at one generation, but those kids that were brainwashed to be homophobic are now doing the same type of mind programming to their own kids, still sitting them down in front of television and letting them hear the homophobic rant of Chris Butler. I really hope that Tulsi Gabbard is gonna wake up and see that she was raised in a very destructive cult. I hope that she will deprogram herself, that her husband Abraham will also be deprogrammed, and they will form a family, have children that will be free from that preaching that homosexuals are sinners. There's no one better to explain what the Chris Butler cult is all about than Rama Ranson, that was born and raised in that cult and that lost everything, including his family, because as a teenager he decided to refuse to adore, to worship Chris Butler. Just listen. Hi Rama, thank you for talking to me today.
Hey Henry, good to be here, man. Thanks.
I would like to know what it was like to be born and raised from a very young age with your brother in the cult of Chris Butler. I know that your parents were totally dedicated and brainwashed by the cult. But how did it work? How were you raised in that cult?
Well, myself and pretty much all these guys who were born into this cult, all the guys who are running things now, it's like from my earliest memory was Chris Butler is this person who you're worshiping every day. You're waking up and you're telling, you have pictures of Chris Butler and you're saying prayers to him. Before you eat any food, you're like taught to say prayers to Chris Butler by his Hindu names. And these are like the earliest memories and the earliest formation of my thoughts and my ideas of the world was all based on this man, Chris Butler, being the truth and being like a godlike figure in our lives.
What is the earliest memory you think? Was it 2 years old, 3 years old?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe for me around probably 3 or 4, and not only do I have the memories of daily worship, like this all goes back to when I had asthma as a child at 3 or 4 years old. They did not give me the asthma inhaler because Chris Butler had ordered that none of the kids take drugs and that we don't go to the doctors. And so even at the young age of 3 or 4, I was put through a lot of suffering, and I was made fully aware that it was because this was pleasing to Chris Butler for me to suffer my asthma attacks of 2 or 3 days, whole weekends, and I would never be taken in, never be given an inhaler, never be taken to the doctor. And after I finally did, they gave us an inhaler, and when I went to use it, my mother confronted me. I was sure I was only 4 years old, maybe 5 at the oldest, but I think I was literally 3 or 4. And she was got above me and was holding the inhaler, saying that this is drugs, this is poison. Srila Prabhupada said, don't use this, and that I had to please Chris Butler above all else, that I had to suffer these asthma attacks arbitrarily for some man who I'd never even met, who was on the other side of the world. And growing up in this group, I'd say in New Zealand, it's a little nicer when you're just kind of living in your small town and your parents chant and stuff, but you're listening to Chris Butler every day. You're basically told that you have to hear his voice, like chanting every night when you go to sleep. We're listening to Chris Butler chanting tapes, and we're told as young kids that if we died and we didn't have the sound, the names of God spoken, from Chris Butler, if we weren't hearing that, then we might, go to hell or something, or be reincarnated. Basically, the only way that you can be sure to be okay is to always have Chris Butler singing the Krishna names, chanting, and because they consider he is the only pure devotee of Krishna in the world. They would tell us this all the time, that all the people from ISKCON and all the other Hare Krishnas were fallen and misled and illegitimate, and that Chris Butler was the only legitimate pure devotee of Krishna. So by that logic, we had to listen to his tapes and we had to listen to his lectures every day. I remember as a young kid listening to extremely graphic lectures constantly, where he's always talking about sex and describing in pornographic detail, like look what it's like to look at a pornographic magazine, or what depraved activities that homosexuals get up to, or that maybe straight people get up to out in the world, using all this fear tactics.
Your parents would make you listen to that stuff about sex when you were 6, 7, 8 years old?
Absolutely. That's the way it goes in the Chris Butler cult. That's normal. That's normal everyday stuff. in 2005, I went back to Australia and I stayed at the house of my friends who were the same age as me, but they stayed in the cult and they married other cult members and they had a bunch of kids. And I was staying in their house and they were doing the exact same thing. And this was the final straw that made me go on the Cult Institution forum and start posting in 2006. But they sat their little kids down in front of Chris Butler video lecture, and he was talking badly about homosexuals, and like he didn't even have a real point, but he spent like a good 5 minutes just going down a list of like derogatory terms for homosexuals and pausing between each one. So like he would be saying, like, I don't know if I want to cuss out on your video, but you can use your imagination. That Chris Butler would sit there and he would say, oh, the gays, the homosexuals, and then he would say, oh, the faggots, and then he would stop and laugh and take a pause break for everyone in the audience to laugh, and then he'd list off another, offensive name for homosexuals and get laughter from the audience. And this was being shown to like these little kids that my friends, kids, like little girls that were like 5 years old, 6 years old, little boy who was like 10, and they were all sitting there like listening to this stuff. And it's the same way that we grew up. Like, did I become homophobic and did others become homophobic because of these teachings? I'd say that it's like across the board. Everybody, all these kids, all my friends who are raised in the cult are extremely homophobic. It's like the most shameful thing to be like caught to not be partaking in the homophobic like slander that the others are talking about. And myself, I think by the time I was 15, like I don't think I ever was really acting out in that way, just kind of taking it on with all the other beliefs of Chris Butler. But by 15 or more, it just never made sense to me that you would, hate someone like that. And I started listening to a lot of music like punk rock that was pro like gay rights and things like that, and just they had lyrical content that had me thinking about that stuff at an early age and had me thinking differently than what I was being taught. But all the other kids, extremely homophobic across the board. Mm-hmm. It's part of the culture in the cult of Chris Butler and the science of identity.
Now I understand that because you are exposing the cult, your mother has completely rejected you and doesn't want to talk to you.
Yes.
And
this all began 10 years ago in 2006, literally on the same trip back to New Zealand where I saw my friends. I went to a wedding that was like a Chris Butler cult wedding, and I visited my mother, and I stayed at this house that Chris Butler owns. Basically, my mother owns it on his behalf, and I initially went on the Cult Education Institute forum, which was called the rickross.com or Rick Ross Institute at the time, but it's the same forum that is currently called the Cult Education Institute. And I posted there, and I said I was born and raised in the cult, and I gave my real name. And Chris Butler ordered my parents to tell me by email that they could have nothing to do with me whatsoever unless I removed every critical thing I wrote about the cult from the internet, and unless I promised to never ever speak out against the cult again, and to also apologize to all the cult members who I may or may not have offended in the few posts that I had made at that time. So these were terms laid out to me through my parents, but given to them by Chris Butler, and they stood by it, like instantly cut me off, and I did not talk to them for years after that. My father died 2 years after that in 2008, and my mother was so brainwashed that she wouldn't even get on to the phone and talk to me in the event of my dad dying. And they were on orders by the cult to make sure that I didn't attend my own father's funeral. And my brother was there before I even heard he was dead. My brother had been flown back to New Zealand and was with my mother, and they both blocked me from coming back, stopped my grandparents from helping me with money to fly back, and were basically had the mission to make sure that I was not allowed at my own father's funeral. And despite my best efforts, I did not go. But if I was in New Zealand, I would have gone for sure. I would have gotten their faces, man.
So can you confirm that in the Chris Butler cult, there's no middle way? You are in or you are out. If you are just a little against or you see anything defective in Chris Butler, you are immediately ostracized. Is that how it works?
Yes, I would say so. I'd say that my case in 2006 was one of the first times that anybody had ever spoken out the way I did on the internet, and their reaction was to give me the full punishment. They took everything from me right off the bat. But basically they'll definitely cut you off if you criticize Chris Butler at all. You don't have to follow along, but you can never criticize Chris Butler. If you do not follow, if you were raised in the group and you choose not to follow, it was a huge frustration with me that my parents were completely closed-minded, would never hear me out on anything that I had to say on an intellectual level or on a philosophical level. And it was all based on the authority of Chris Butler being right, and they would just look down on me and feel sorry for me and do nothing but try to recruit me back into the group. And so I think part of what I did when I posted on the forum was to push it past the point of no return. I would try to talk to them about not liking Chris Butler and that I disagreed with it, but they would just block it out and not hear me. But as soon as I said any of this on the internet, they cut me off completely. So it was my way of pushing the issue to be looked at, and they will cut you off for criticizing Chris Butler openly in any way.